I've never told anyone this, but after that night on I-95, I feel like I need to share. I'm a truck driver, and that morning I was alone, with the road completely empty in front of me. The sun had already set for a while and I was on my way to Miami, with a few hours of travel still to go. The atmosphere was strange, somewhat stuffy, but nothing that I had really noticed until that moment. The only thing that bothered me was a strange sound coming from the trailer. It wasn't the sound of cargo moving, it wasn't a normal road sound, it was something I couldn't identify. At first, I thought it was the engine, some noise from a part coming loose or something like that. But it didn't make sense, the sound seemed to be coming from inside the trailer, and I couldn't find the source. It was like it was coming from a specific point, but every time I tried to focus, it changed, like it was moving. It was a kind of beat, but not something heavy. It was a light sound, almost like a scratch, but with no logical explanation. I looked in the rearview mirror, but there was nothing. Just the road behind me, dark and deserted. It was late, and I was starting to get irritated. I stopped at a gas station, grabbed my flashlight and went to the trailer to see what was going on. I looked through the compartment, looked at the entire load, passed the flashlight through each corner of the trailer. There was nothing there that could make that sound. The cargo was in the right place, the wooden planks were firm, and the rest was in perfect condition. I looked again, still feeling like something was missing, but nothing. I decided to continue my journey, still trying to ignore what I had heard. That's where things got strange. Even after getting back on the road and starting the engine again, the sound continued. It wasn't constant, but it was there, as if it had followed me. And the worst part, the more I tried to ignore it, the clearer it became. I tried turning up the volume on the radio, opening the window to see if the wind could drown out the noise, but nothing helped. The sound was clear in my head, as if someone was gently tapping on the walls of the trailer. It wasn't a normal thing, it wasn't a road thing. And as much as I tried to find an explanation, it only got more confusing. I was starting to go crazy. You know that feeling of being watched, but you can't see who's watching you? That's how I felt. As if the sound was testing me, challenging me to understand what was happening. I sped up, tried to think about anything else, but the noise wouldn't stop. Sometimes it seemed like it was coming from a specific corner, near the back of the trailer, and other times, it seemed to be coming from the bottom, like it was at the bottom of the load, behind everything. What bothered me most was that there was nothing there that could do that. Nothing visible, at least. I was about to stop again and check everything, when I saw the sign of another gas station on the road. I thought I needed a little rest, maybe a break to release the tension. But before I stopped, I had a strange feeling. The kind of feeling that makes your skin crawl, you know? I looked in the rearview mirror and saw something that didn't make sense. There was no car behind me, no lights, no movement. But the sound continued. And suddenly, it seemed like he was getting taller. As if something was approaching, something unknown. The trailer seemed to be vibrating with the sound. That's when I noticed something even stranger. The whole time, the sound didn't stop, but it had no rhythm, no pattern. It was as if something or someone was trying to communicate with me in a way I didn't understand. What scared me most was that I wasn't alone in the truck, but I also wasn't listening to anyone. There was no explanation. No people in there, no animals, nothing that could be causing the noise. And the feeling of being watched only increased. I began to feel like the whole road seemed colder, darker, more oppressive. I couldn't explain it, but the whole thing started to get more dense. I tried to ignore it, moving on, thinking it was all just a product of tiredness. But when I looked in the mirror, the tension in the air seemed to manifest itself. I was on a straight line, with the road completely deserted, and when the light from the headlights illuminated the road ahead, I saw something. something fleeting, very fast. As if a shadow had crossed in front of me. I walked straight past, but I looked out the window, and the feeling of dread that came over me was indescribable. There was something there, someone, or something. I didn't know what else to think, but the feeling that something was watching me, trying to reach me, was the worst thing I'd ever felt in my life. That shadow. I still don't know what it was, but I feel cold just remembering it. With every kilometer I drove, the sound of the trailer became more and more present. It was like it was surrounding me, getting closer and closer. The road was deserted, there wasn't a single car, just me and that noise. I couldn't concentrate on driving anymore. I was already panicking, my mind running in 1,000 directions, trying to find a logical explanation, but none of them made sense. It was impossible to ignore. Something was hiding inside the trailer, but I didn't know what it was. I decided to stop. It was no longer possible to continue without understanding what was happening. I pulled over to the side of the road and, with my heart racing, walked over to the trailer once again. My flashlight illuminated the corners, but the feeling that something was there, watching me, only increased. I went through everything again. I lifted some of the wooden planks, went to the furthest parts of the load, but nothing. The sound was more distant now, almost inaudible. I looked at the road, but there was no longer any shadow, no strange movement. Everything seemed peaceful, but something inside me said that wasn't true. It was like I was being tricked, like what was happening wasn't real, but at the same time I knew it was. I decided to get back in the truck and continue. The sound was weaker, but it didn't disappear. When I returned to the cabin and buckled up, a feeling of discomfort came over me. I was no longer alone. I knew that somehow that sound wasn't coming from the trailer. No matter where I looked, the feeling that there was something in there, something watching me, never went away. The problem is that, somehow, it seemed like that something didn't want to be found. It wasn't just a presence. It was something that messed with my mind, with my perception. I was forced to believe that maybe I was just imagining it all. But something told me no. The drive continued, and no matter how hard I tried to get back into my driving routine, the sound never stopped. He was there, the whole time, like a constant presence. Just when I thought I was at peace, he came back, more intense. It felt like it was guiding me somewhere, but where? The trailer was empty, but the feeling that something was there was still with me. I passed a few more gas stations but couldn't stop again. The idea of going back and searching the trailer seemed ridiculous to me now. But the sound wouldn't leave me alone. Never. I still wonder to this day what that was. What really happened that night, on that deserted Florida road? To this day, I have no answer. I don't know what happened that night. The sound, the shadow, the feeling of being watched. All of this stayed with me for a long time afterwards. When I finally arrived at my destination, I left the truck in the yard and couldn't look at it the same way again. The nights passed, and I tried to move on, but the noise still echoed in my head. And the worst? He never stopped completely. Every time I closed my eyes, I felt like he was there, waiting. As if the sound was just dormant, waiting for the right moment to return. The feeling that something was in me, inside me, consuming me. Something that wasn't just in the trailer, but in my mind. For weeks, I tried to forget all that. But on every trip I took, the sound seemed to follow me, somehow. When he got home, he had nightmares. I dreamed of that trailer, of that uncontrollable sound, of that feeling of presence. I never found a logical explanation for what happened. I saw nothing, I found nothing, but the feeling of being watched, of being pursued, never left me. I'm still scared of getting on the road at night. And when I catch myself thinking about that trip, I know something inexplicable happened. Something I can never understand. Something that changed me forever. To this day, when I'm driving at night, my heart races, and I look in the mirrors for fear of seeing something that shouldn't be there. I don't know what it was, but I know it wasn't just my head. Something was there, on that road, and to this day, even years later, I can't explain it. I don't know if it was some kind of hallucination, some game of my mind, or if there was something really there. What I do know is that since that night, I have never been the same. The sound, the presence, still haunts me. I will never forget. And to this day, if anyone asks me, I'll say the same thing. I don't know what happened, but I feel like I'll never be alone on the road again. I've never told anyone this, but after that night on I-40, I just can't stop thinking about it. I've been a truck driver for years, and I'm used to long journeys, but nothing was like that night. I was traveling through Arizona, late, almost 2 a.m., and the road was deserted. There was no car nearby. The radio was off, and the sound of the engine was the only thing that broke the silence of the night. The only light came from my headlights, which illuminated the road ahead, almost unrecognizable in the fog that was beginning to form. But then, I saw something. It was a man. He was standing in the middle of the road, with his arms at his sides, as if he was waiting for someone. I can't explain exactly what made me stop. Maybe it was the fact that he was in the middle of such an empty road. He was dressed in simple clothes, he looked tired. The face was partially hidden by the shadow of the night, but I could still see that he seemed to be waiting for something. Something inside me told me to stop. I don't know why, but I did. I stopped the truck a little before him, and approached the window, asking if he needed help. When I started to speak, the man didn't move. I stood there, waiting for an answer, but he was completely still. The atmosphere became even stranger, as if the sound of the road had disappeared. I was starting to get uncomfortable, until suddenly he disappeared. He didn't turn around, he didn't make any movement. He just disappeared. As if swallowed by darkness. I stood there in shock, looking at where he was, trying to understand what had just happened. I stayed there for a few more minutes, trying to process what I saw. I looked around, but there was no one else on the road. There were no cars, there were no signs that the man had run away. It was as if the guy had disintegrated into thin air. I didn't know what to think, so I went back to the truck, still feeling like something was wrong. I didn't know if it was my mind playing tricks or if something else was going on. I left, but the stranger didn't stop there. When I arrived at a gas station further ahead, I decided to ask the attendant if he knew anything strange in that area. He looked at me for a while, almost as if he was waiting for me to say something else. When I finally told him about the man in the road, he became serious and told me that, weeks before, a man had been run over on that same part of I-40. They didn't know much about the details, but the case was quite mysterious, as no one could identify the driver, and the body was found with signs that he had been stopped on the road before being hit. That story gave me goosebumps. I didn't know what to think, but the connection between the man on the road and what the gas station attendant told me was impossible to ignore. I started doing the math in my head. If the man I saw was the same man who had been run over, then what was he doing there? And why did he appear to me that night, in the middle of such a deserted road? I tried to shake the thought away, but it stuck to me, as if an invisible hand was pulling me into that mystery. It couldn't be a coincidence, could it? It wasn't just a made-up horror story, it wasn't something my mind had fabricated out of exhaustion. I knew what I had seen. The road became even scarier after that encounter. I passed that stretch of I-40 several times, but every time I got close, I felt the same chill down my spine. When I looked at the place where the man had been, it seemed like something was still there, waiting. I couldn't help it. The place felt like a silent battlefield, with the weight of the tragedy still hanging in the air, an invisible yet palpable presence. Every time I passed by, my stomach turned, and I started looking at the mirrors more often, hoping to see something or someone that shouldn't be there. One night, after weeks of trying to forget, I was driving through that area again, on a trip I shouldn't have taken. The silence on the road was unsettling, as always, but that night felt different. I wasn't alone. I no longer had the feeling that the road was just a road. I could feel my eyes moving faster, searching for any sign of movement, of anything that wasn't normal. I was on the verge of going crazy with this growing fear. And then I saw it again. He was there, in the same position, standing in the middle of the road. The man. I didn't know how to react. This time, I didn't stop. I wasn't able to. The fear that gripped me was so strong that the only thought I had was to speed up. The truck roared past him, but even as I accelerated, the fear didn't disappear. His face was still before my eyes, as if he had fixed himself in my mind, marking my every thought. When I looked in the rearview mirror, he was no longer there. But the feeling that he was still watching me, that he never stopped following me, was the worst part of it all. I continued on my journey, but this time, a part of me knew something was wrong, and that stayed with me, without explanation, to this day. I reached my destination, but the feeling that something was missing, something unresolved, haunted me the entire time. I tried to convince myself that I hadn't seen anything, that it was all an illusion. But the problem was, when I returned home, the memories of those nights, of that man standing on the road, began to haunt my dreams. I would see myself driving and, suddenly, he would appear again, always in the same place, always with the same strange posture. As if waiting for something. Or maybe waiting for me. I couldn't sleep properly anymore, and the images of that road, of that man, haunted me even during the day. I looked for information about the accident. What the gas station attendant had told me was true. A man had been run over on that part of the road. But the strangest thing of all was that no one knew who he was. There were no records about him, nothing. It didn't make sense. People in the city said it was just a common case, a hit and run that had gone unanswered. But I knew that wasn't it. It wasn't just another accident. Not for me. Not after what I saw. Something didn't fit, and the man on the road continued to torment me, like a nightmare that never ends. I tried to avoid I-40 for weeks. Whenever my route passed through there, I found a way to make a detour. But I knew I couldn't run away from it forever. I needed to face what I had seen, what I had felt. I needed to go back. When I finally took another trip there, the place was quiet, like any other road. But when I passed the stretch where I first saw him, something told me he was still there. That the man was still waiting, standing still, in the same position. I looked at the mirrors, and for a second, I had the feeling he was behind me. But this time, when I looked at the road again, there was nothing. Nothing but darkness and the empty road. And I don't know if that was a relief or if the feeling of fear was still there, waiting, in some corner of my mind. To this day, whenever I pass that road, even during the day, the feeling that the man is there, standing still haunts me. I don't know if what I saw was real or if my mind was just playing with my fears, but something tells me that that man wasn't just a roadkill. He was something more, something that got stuck on that stretch of road, something that somehow found me. And to this day, I don't know if I'll ever see the man on the road again. But I know if I do, I won't stop to help. I know a lot of people would say this is all in my head, but what happened that night in New Mexico still haunts me. I've been a truck driver for years, and I've seen a lot of strange things on the road, but nothing like that. It was a moonless night, and the road was completely empty, with the desert stretching as far as the eye could see. I was going to Albuquerque, a long trip, and tiredness was starting to get to me. When I looked at the mirrors and saw that glow in the distance, I thought it was a stopped car, maybe a broken headlight. But as I got closer, I realized the glow was coming from a truck. The truck was stopped on the side of the road, with its lights on, but there were no other vehicles nearby. That caught my attention. I was already used to seeing broken-down cars and trucks in remote places, but what intrigued me most was the fact that there was no sign of anyone around. There was nothing left, just that truck with the lights flashing. It gave me a strange feeling, but as I was getting closer, I decided to stop and see what was going on. Maybe someone needed help, or the driver just took a break to rest. I always stop to help when I see something out of the ordinary. When I stopped the truck and got out, the silence on that part of the road was suffocating. There was no wind, there was no sound, as if time was standing still. I walked to the cab of the abandoned truck and took a look inside. At first, it seemed normal. The keys were on the driver's seat, as if the guy had left quickly and forgotten them. There were no signs of a struggle or anything else to suggest anything was wrong. The interior was dusty, but nothing seemed out of place. The only strange thing was the feeling that something was wrong. As if, somehow, that truck was an empty shell, waiting for something. I decided not to touch the keys or touch anything else. But what really made me stop and question everything was when I looked abroad. There were no signs that the truck had been recently abandoned. The engine was cold, and the surrounding road was clear. Nobody there. I looked around, but the road was still deserted, lifeless, motionless. It was as if time had simply stopped at that moment, and the truck was a part of a puzzle that made no sense. I stood there for a few minutes, not knowing what to do. I went back to my truck, still feeling like something was wrong, but I couldn't figure out what exactly. I was still trying to understand what I had just seen, but I decided to move on. When I got back to my truck and prepared to leave, I couldn't help but look at the abandoned truck one more time. The same oppressive silence was in the air, as if the road was watching me. The feeling that something wasn't right never left my mind. I continued my journey, but the thought of that truck being there, with the lights on and empty, began to torment me. The deserted road, the surrounding desert, everything seemed even lonelier after seeing that. The next morning, when I stopped at a gas station, I couldn't help but ask the attendant if he knew anything about that truck. He looked at me with a confused expression, as if he was trying to understand what I was saying. When I told him about the stopped truck, he got serious and told me that it wasn't unusual in that area. What made me even more disconcerted was when he mentioned that the truck had been abandoned for days. I asked him how he knew, and he replied that over the past few days, several people had reported the same truck on the road. And the strangest thing? No one ever saw the driver. Just the truck, with the lights on and the interior empty, parked on the side of the road. This made me question even more what I had seen that night. I knew the truck was empty when I looked, but then why was it there, with the lights on, and no one seemed to know who owned it? I looked for more information, but everything I found was more disconcerting. The truck had actually been abandoned for days, and the police had been called to investigate, but there was no clue as to where the driver could be. No people were found in the area, and no one knew anything. The story only got worse when I discovered that the truck belonged to a transport company that was trying to track the vehicle, but without success. As if the person had disappeared into thin air, like the truck itself. I still don't understand what happened. When I passed the road again, days later, I didn't see the truck in the same place. There was no trace of him, as if the desert itself had swallowed the truck whole. But I know what I saw. I know the truck was there, with the lights on, and no one around. That feeling that something was wrong is still with me, and no matter how hard I try to understand, I know I will never have an explanation. What happened that night? Who was that driver? And, more importantly, why was that truck there, empty and abandoned, waiting for something I will never know? To this day, whenever I drive down a deserted New Mexico highway, I look around, hoping to see that truck again. I don't know what happened that night, and I don't know if what I saw was real or just a tired hallucination. But every trip I take, there's always this feeling that something was left behind, something I didn't fully understand. Every time I pass that stretch of road, I get a chill, like I'm being watched by something I can't see, like the truck is waiting for me to come back. I try to ignore it, but I know I won't be able to forget it. Something there was not normal. I asked other people who knew the area, and some said they had heard of abandoned trucks in remote areas, but nothing as peculiar as what I saw. And what scares me most is that, despite all the investigation into the truck, no one has been able to discover anything. The driver never showed up, and the truck disappeared from the map without a trace. As if it had been an illusion, or perhaps a presence that disappeared before anyone had a chance to understand. The strangest thing of all is that as I tried to find answers, I felt like I was being pulled back to that place. Something was calling me, and I didn't know if that was a good idea or a bad idea. I know some will think I'm exaggerating or that my mind played a trick, but I swear, to this day, that what I saw was real. The truck was there, in the middle of the road, and I don't know what happened to the driver, but I know that that empty feeling stayed with me. As if the truck itself had sat there waiting for something that would never come. No matter how many times I passed that stretch, the feeling never went away. Something about it was different from anything I've ever experienced. Now, whenever I see an abandoned truck on the road, my heart skips a beat. Not out of fear, but out of this constant feeling that something is waiting to be discovered, but never will be. And I know I will never forget the abandoned truck, parked on the deserted road, with the lights on. Because even though the road continues ahead of me, that mystery will never leave me. I never believed these stories about unexplainable things on the road until I experienced one of them. I've been a truck driver for years and I've traveled many desert roads, but nothing, absolutely nothing, was like that night on I-80 in Wyoming. I was in the middle of a long trip, alone, as always. The night was quiet, the kind of night where you start to hear every sound inside the truck. The radio was on, but the music wasn't playing, just that familiar static in the background, like it was waiting for something. I was tired, but nothing seemed out of the ordinary. That's when I started hearing the sound. It wasn't just any noise, it wasn't just the usual radio hiss. It was different. It was like an old piece of music, like those scratchy AM radio records you hear on some stations from decades ago. I paused for a second, trying to understand what was happening. The sound was coming from the truck's radio, but it seemed distant, as if it were being transmitted from another time, another place. I took a look at the radio screen, but everything seemed normal. The display was static, as if the signal was from a station lost in the night. And suddenly, a sentence. Or at least, I think I heard. I pulled the truck over to the side of the road and turned off the radio, but the sound was still there, in my head. It was as if the radio had stopped, but the music was still echoing inside the cabin. I looked in the mirrors and, for a moment, I felt watched. But there was nothing but the darkness of the road. My heart was beating faster, and I knew it couldn't just be my mind playing tricks. It was something real, something that couldn't be explained. When I looked at the radio again, everything was quiet. The sound was gone, but the feeling that something was out of place remained. I continued my journey, but the sound didn't leave me alone. For the rest of the night, whenever the road was quiet, I could swear he was there, deep in the static. As if it were approaching me, but without explanation. Over the kilometers, the fear grew. I could no longer ignore the feeling that I was being followed by something from the past. I came to think it was some kind of hallucination, tiredness getting to me, or maybe the radio was simply broken. But that didn't explain what I heard. I was sure it wasn't just static. The next morning, when stopping at a gas station, I decided to ask the gas station attendant if he knew of anything strange on the road, perhaps a problem with the radio or some type of interference. He looked at me curiously and, before I could say more, he asked if I had passed a specific section of I-80, something I hadn't even really noticed during the trip. When he told me that in that area, years before, a truck driver had died in an accident, something froze inside me. He explained to me that since that day, some people have reported hearing strange sounds coming from their radios, as if something from the past was still present there, trying to communicate. I stayed silent, trying to process what he was saying. When he finished telling me, I felt a lump in my throat. What he said made my stomach turn. The accident, according to the gas station attendant, was tragic. The truck driver had lost control of the vehicle, and the truck had overturned on the same stretch of road where I had passed. He died instantly, but the strangest thing was that no one could ever really explain what happened. The truck's radio, according to witnesses, was working perfectly before the accident, but afterwards, some people swore they heard the sound of an old radio, playing alone, in a static gap. I didn't know what to think, but in that moment, I felt like everything was connecting. That sound, that strange music that I had heard the night before, now seemed to have a much more sinister meaning. I began to make the connection between the radio, the accident, and the feeling of being watched. The idea that the sound was coming from somewhere beyond time, from somewhere in the past, made me increasingly uneasy. As if the radio was some kind of portal, or perhaps a reminder of what happened that tragic night. I didn't know if what I heard was actually the spirit of that truck driver trying to communicate, or if my mind was just trying to understand something it couldn't. But the feeling that something was moving in the shadows of the road never left me. I spent the next few days trying to avoid that stretch of I-80. But even though I tried to forget it, I couldn't get the sound out of my head. Every time silence took over the road, I could hear that static again, mixed with fragments of that distant music. Whenever I passed by the area where the accident happened, the fear returned with full force. I looked at the mirrors and felt that, even though the road was the same, there was something different, as if I were being guided back to that tragic moment, as if the radio was calling me to understand something I didn't want to know. I don't know if it was a reflection of fear or something more real, but I started to fear the road more than anything else. Something in that area was stuck in the past, and it seemed like I couldn't escape that easily. The truth is that I could never listen to the radio the same way again. Whenever I'm on the road, the sound of static seems to follow me, as if it's lurking, waiting for a quiet moment to reveal itself. The feeling that there is something there, something that comes from the past, has never left me. Every time I travel through that area of I-80, I pass it quickly, my gaze fixed on the road ahead, but the feeling that I'm being watched, as if that presence is waiting to be discovered, is unbearable. I find myself looking in the mirrors, hoping to see something, hoping to hear the sound of a broken radio that no longer belongs to me. A few weeks later, when I went to find out more about the accident, I was informed that the truck driver who died in that area was well liked among his colleagues on the road. He had been known to always stop to help other drivers, and from what I was told, his radio was always on, playing oldies. Some colleagues, who still remember him, said that he had a very strong connection with that radio, as if it were a link with the past, and some even believed that, in some way, he was still present on the road. I don't know if this is true, but what I heard and felt that night makes me question everything. I don't know what happened that night, but what I experienced impacted me in a way that I still feel uncomfortable on the road to this day. The sound, the static, the old music, everything seemed real, as if something had connected between me and that truck driver lost in time. Maybe it's just a story from the road, something to scare newcomers. But for me, it was more than that. It was an experience that changed my mind and my beliefs. Today, whenever I hear static on my radio, the feeling of being watched returns, and the only thing I know is that, somewhere on that road, something remains. Something from the past, waiting to be heard again. I don't know if the radio still plays there, if the truck driver is still trying to make contact, or if it was all just an illusion caused by tiredness. But what happened that night, and what I discovered afterwards, will never leave my mind. The sound of the past still echoes, even in silence. And I know that if I ever return to that area of I-80, the sound will probably be waiting for me, once again, to remind me that some things never go away. They just stay, waiting for the right moment to appear. I was on I-5 in California that night, another lonely trip, like so many others. It was late at night, and the road was practically deserted, except for the headlights illuminating the road ahead. The sky was clear, but there was something strange in the air, as if the night was thicker, heavier. I was heading north, on a long and tiring journey, when suddenly I saw something in the middle of the road. At first, I thought it was an animal, or even a fallen tree, but as I got closer, I realized it was a man. He was standing in the middle of the track, not moving, looking at the ground. I got scared, but still, I stopped the truck. The feeling that something wasn't right came over me. I looked in the rearview mirror and, in the darkness, everything seemed too quiet. The man was standing there, as if he was waiting for something, but he didn't seem desperate or worried. I sped up a little, perhaps expecting him to move to the side, but he didn't do anything. I went more slowly towards him, deciding to ask if everything was okay, if he needed help. When I parked the truck and got out, the feeling of strangeness only increased. The man was still there, motionless, but when I took the first step towards him, he disappeared. I stopped in the middle of the road, with the headlights illuminating the asphalt, trying to understand what had just happened. I looked everywhere, but there was no sign of him anymore. No movement, nothing. As if he had disappeared into thin air. I stood there for a few minutes, not knowing what to do. The feeling of dread began to invade me, as if the silence of the road was swallowing me. I got back in the truck and tried to continue my journey, but that event wouldn't get out of my head. I didn't know if fatigue was playing tricks on me or if something really strange had happened. Over the next few days, I tried to forget what I saw. But something told me it wasn't just my mind. I couldn't understand, so I decided to ask at the gas station where I stopped on the trip. When I commented about the man on the road, the gas station attendant looked at me with a serious expression. He told me that what I saw was not an illusion. The man I saw on the road had been run over in that same area weeks before. He said the accident was tragic and that, since then, some drivers had reported seeing a man standing on the road at night, somewhere close to that spot. And the strangest thing? No one had ever been able to say who he was. His name was never found, but the appearances continued. I was silent for a long time after hearing that. The gas station attendant told me that many people had passed through that area and reported something similar. The man on the road, standing still, as if he was waiting for something. But he never moved. They said he always disappeared before anyone could approach him. And what disturbed me most was knowing that the descriptions of all these apparitions coincided. The man was the same height, the same clothes, and, even without a clear face in anyone's memory, he always seemed to be there, in the same spot. As if he were trapped in that place, unable to leave. And the feeling that he wanted something, but no one knew what. That night, I couldn't sleep well. I tried to remember the man's face, but the more I thought about him, the harder it became to remember anything concrete. Only the image of him standing in the middle of the road, looking at the ground, became clear in my mind. That presence, empty and distant, was still with me. I don't know why, but something in me told me he wasn't just lost. As if there was something unresolved, something that kept him there, on that deserted road, waiting. And with every kilometer I drove, I couldn't help but look in the mirrors, hoping to see that figure in the darkness. When I returned to that area days later, the feeling that something was following me hit me again. I passed the same part of I-5, the same deserted stretch, and even with the sun high, I couldn't help but look around. I didn't see the man again, but I felt like he was there. Something told me he was lurking, waiting. When I saw the sign for a gas station up ahead, the fear was almost palpable. I didn't want to stop, but at the same time, I felt like I needed to know more about this man, about what he wanted. What was he still doing there, on the side of the road, where his life had ended so tragically? At that gas station, I spoke to another gas station attendant, an older one, who, luckily, knew the story of the accident. He said the man was never identified because there were no documents found at the scene. The accident had been terrible, and the body was quickly taken away. But what disturbed me most was when he said, "Some say he's still around. Others say he's never gone. And anyone who sees him feels like they're being called." This made me even more uneasy. As if, somehow, the man I saw that night was trying to tell me something, to make me understand his pain. I didn't know what to do with this feeling. I didn't know if I wanted to understand or if I preferred to forget everything that had happened. I spent the next few days trying to shake off the memories of that night, but every time I traveled down I-5, the feeling that the man was there, watching me, never went away. Every time I passed the section where the accident happened, I felt the weight of the road, as if it was reminding me of something. As if the man was still there, waiting for an answer that would never come. It was like he was testing me, challenging me to understand something I couldn't understand. Maybe he was stuck in that place, like an echo of a time that could no longer be undone. Or maybe it was just fear creating more mystery, more doubt. In a last attempt to find some explanation, I went back to the gas station and talked to a few more drivers. Everyone seemed to know the story. Everyone talked about the man on the road, but no one could explain what really happened. Some people said he would never leave, others thought he was just stuck in the memory of his own death, an unanswerable death. What disturbed me most was a conversation with an older truck driver who told me, "You'll never see him again until the day he needs you." What did he mean by that? I didn't know, but his words left a deep impression on me. Over time, I began to realize that this man and what happened on that road had become a part of me. Even after many trips, many kilometers driven, something told me that I would never be the same. Something about that night, that strange encounter, changed me. Every time I come back to I-5, I feel that man's gaze, even though he's no longer there. Like he left something in me, something I can't ignore, something that can't be forgotten. And as the road continues, I know that somehow he's still waiting, standing in the darkness, waiting for someone, waiting for me. I will never know what really happened that night, what the man wanted, or if he was really trying to show me something. What I do know is that, to this day, when night falls and the road stretches out in front of me, I look in the rearview mirror, and for a brief moment, I wonder if he's still there, in the darkness, waiting to appear again. And maybe one day, I'll understand what he wanted. Or maybe I'll never understand. But one thing is certain, that road, that man, and that meeting, will never leave my mind.